People here are understandably very nervous, especially after the number of infected exploded over the weekend. Not only that, when we landed here in Wuhan earlier today, we saw people, many of them wearing masks around the baggage carousel while we were waiting for our own bags. Taking a look at what's happening in the United States, U.S. officials want to make sure that they are raising the defenses, and that is what they are doing there, because right now, as of now, there has not been a U.S. infection as of yet.
I'm Garrett McQueen.
I'm Scott Blankenship.
And this is TRILLOQUY, the classical music podcast that celebrates Ujima year-round. You're listening to this. This drops on the 5th day of Kwanzaa, marked by the guiding principle of Nia. We're recording this, Scott and I, on Monday, and this is the 3rd day of Kwanzaa, and it's the guiding principle of Ujima. And we did our little Ujima thing before dinner. What do you think about the idea of collective work and responsibility? Do you think TRILLOQUY is that?
I do, but man, am I ever missing that collective work, having worked solo for the last 9-ish months. Oh, man, some collective work would be most welcome.
That's actually a good point. Yeah, collective work through COVID. Wow. So happy Kwanzaa, everyone. I'll speak a little bit to Kwanzaa a little later in this opus, but I wanted to make sure that I got to that. On the downbeat, Scott, we heard from CBS News reporter Rami Inocencio talking about something called, let me look at my notes here, coronavirus. I mean, isn't it funny to, in not even a year's time, the world has changed that much to where this idea of, oh, some people are wearing masks. There are 200 people who have tested positive for this thing. And will it come to the United States? Fast forward to now. Isn't that nuts?
People in the future are going to look back and say, God, can you imagine them walking around all the time without masks on?
Yeah. It's really something else. So in this opus, this final opus of the year 2020, we're going to speak to some of the things that kind of stuck out this year, with COVID being one of them. Just a few announcements here before we jump in. I actually have a few job announcements. So again, in the spirit of Ujima, collective work and responsibility, I'm helping y'all get to work. So here we go. Make Music NOLA out of New Orleans, an award-winning music education nonprofit organization, seeks a virtual violin teacher for their advanced violin class. This is an hourly gig of $40 to $55 an hour. Classes are, it looks like, I'm looking here, looks like about 10 to 20 hours a week. So a really great virtual job that is guaranteed virtual through May. I'll have the link to that in the description of this opus. I also wanted to let you guys know about a position at Reed College. The music department at Reed College is inviting applications for a 1-year position in musicology as visiting assistant professor for the 2021-2022 academic years. So if you are one of the musicology people, be sure to go take a look at that. And finally, the American Composers Forum is looking for an executive assistant. And I think it's really cool that Vanessa has been on the podcast a couple times, including the overture to season 2 of TRILLOQUY that we taped a little earlier this year. So if you want to meet Vanessa, if you want to learn what she about, if you want to see if she about it and is she down, I think take a listen to that and take a watch to that. The overture is on the website, and you can see if you would really be interested in working for the American Composers Forum as her executive assistant. The job starts at $50K, so a nice little job for COVID times when it's hard to get work and all that sort of thing. So I'll have information on that and all of those positions that I just announced in the description of this opus. You wanted to give a shout out to someone before we got started too.
Yeah, Rachel Barton Pine. You know about her Music by Black Composers project, right?
Yeah.
Okay, they're approaching their 20th anniversary. So shout out to that. Their mission is to inspire Black students to begin and continue instrumental training, make the music of Black composers available to everyone, and to help change the face of classical music through greater diversity. And for 20 years of that sort of work, congratulations and thank you. Shout out to Rachel Barton Pine.
Today's guest, I invited back on the podcast, Miss Quanice Floyd, because we've been talking about AFTA and all of the things that she's been involved with as far as keeping these institutions, holding them accountable. So I invited her back on the podcast. I wanted to mention her, well, because she's the guest for this opus, but also when we talk about allyship and being an ally, something that Quanice touched on in our conversation was that she doesn't believe in someone being an ally. She believes in someone being an accomplice, someone that is going to use your power and your privilege and your access to get something for us. Rachel Barton Pine did that. I don't see Rachel Barton Pine as one of these white women trying to monopolize on something that's new or something that's
or to capitalize on it.
That's what I mean. Yeah, capitalize on something that's going on right now. As you've just announced, I mean, this is a couple decades in the making. And how will we know so many of these tunes by these black composers if it wasn't for this for that recording? One of the ones I'm thinking about right now is the Levy Dance by Clarence Cameron White. I hadn't even heard of him as a composer, much less that connection to black culture and X, Y, and Z, thanks to Rachel Barton Pine. So yeah, shout out to her. You have to do that kind of work to get a free spot, a free shout out. If you're not announcing a job, you really got to do the work. And I think Rachel Barton Pine did. So huge shout out to her. Let's get in the first movement. So Scott, as I mentioned, it's the final opus of TRILLOQUY for 2020. So we're going to spend a little bit of time looking back at this year, including in this first movement. We're not going to spend a lot of time checking a lot of accidentals here because we're going to look back and we each picked out an opus that we want to touch on. But I did want to speak to some of the big news that I think impacts just about everyone, artists and everyone alike, the stimulus package or this second stimulus.
Are you feeling stimulated?
I hope that my Cash App is stimulated very soon. So as we record this, it looks like on the news, again, this is Monday evening, it looks like on the news that Trump signed for us to get 2,000 instead of 600. Is that what it looks like?
Well, the House voted to do that.
Oh, okay.
Right. So
but he alleged that's what he wanted.
Right. But they're going to hold his feet to the fire now to see if he's actually going to up that to $2,000. And also, the House also they have overridden his veto of the defense budget. So
it's hard not
strike two.
It's hard not to be at least for me, I'll speak for myself. It's hard for me not to be frustrated with the women and men in Congress because it seems like they're going to these daily meetings and having these debates and blah, blah, blah when folks are waiting. Now, it's one thing for me to want the stimulus check. I'm not one of these parents with kids. I'm not one of these folks I am someone who was fired from, or not laid off, but
sure.
But I'm working, so I'm grateful. I'm not someone who's down and out in that way. So there are folks who need that, right. And $2,000 is not a drop in the bucket 9-10 months in for folks who lost their job and have to stay home and can't do anything. But at least they might eat that week, or at least that is a couple days where their shoulders are lowered a little bit and they're sitting around. This is not the politics podcast, but you can't help but to think about it,
I do think about it a lot. And what I think about is, what do the people who voted on this in Congress think is going to happen with that money? Do they think that people are going to get it and go out and start spreading it around in retail? Because the people that I know that need it are going to start paying back their landlord. They're going to start paying off an extension on a loan or something like that. Who's gonna take this money and go and just spread it all around?
I say this every week, not to spend too long here, but not to spend too long here. If you think a few weeks back when I had Alison Loggins Hole and Edith Corman from Ensemble Pie, this was back on mid-October Opus, where they were talking about reparations and giving that concert for to raise awareness about reparations. Mm-hmm. What that would be, when we talk about reparations, we're talking about giving black folk the infrastructure on which to build. When we're talking about these stimulus packages, folks are so down underneath the ground, so far down in the hole. We aren't even talking about the infrastructure. We're talking about the survival, getting from up underwater. So the work that I believe we need to do is so grand in comparison to a $2,000 check. And folks in power are just refusing to see that. We have AOC up there, but
that's like
there's
taking
so much work to be
a
done.
little drop of water and putting it into a hot skillet. It's gone right away.
That's what I'm saying. Anyway, I didn't mean to get off on that. But anyway, so one of the things that came up last week when folks started to talk about this stimulus was all of the other things that are buried within the bill, one of which being a streaming sort of piece of drama. I'm reading here from a website, TechCrunch. The name of the article is "The New Stimulus Bill Makes Illegal Streaming a Felony." All right. It says here, we've already written several stories about the new pandemic stimulus. There are, however, other provisions that could also have serious implications for the technology and media worlds. For one thing, the bill includes a proposal from Senator Tom Tillis that would make illegal streaming for profit a felony with penalties of up to 10 years of imprisonment. Now, in the body of this article, it writes about how Tom Tillis alleges that this is only for the big companies that are really trying to monetize off of streaming and do it in an illegal and pirating way. But some of the conversations that I've seen surrounding this, particularly when it comes to orchestral music, is that orchestras who have been streaming concerts because you can't have folks inside, their music has been tagged or blocked by bots, by robots who hear Beethoven, whatever, and think it's this recording and flag it for illegal streaming. Go. What do you think?
It seems like it is the next controlling step, doesn't it?
It looks like, again, according to Tom Tillis, he's really looking at the big people trying to pirate. But you can't forget, again, I mentioned those robots. If anyone is trying to do anything that one of these copyright robot things are looking to flag, that's it. And that's within the laws and the rules. I actually have planned a music lawyer to come on to have an actual take on this because, we're not lawyers or looking into all that. But, I think about the so-called legal side of it, so what's right and doing everything else. But I'm thinking about just the people side of it as well. What if someone is trying to stream something and make $1 in the middle of this panorama, not even a panorama. What is this called? A pandemic. So what that they're trying to do that. And I think that is where more of this frustration is coming from. We have a whole bill wrapped up into this stimulus thing that's protecting who? The people? No. It's protecting the big machine. And I think that's the rub.
And it has to be an instance where they're trying to take tips or something like that. Is that it? Because you got a lot of people out there who use YouTube as sort of their video sample reel. If you want to hear my work, here's my page where they play all sorts of stuff.
Again, and it says a bill that would make illegal streaming for profit.
Okay, just being sure.
But streaming on YouTube. Let's think about all of the folks who play video games. Shout out to my friend Misha, who has a stream on Twitch. What if that music is flagged? Do they have to play on mute? What do you do?
Well, I think you can go into the settings and actually turn the music off, can't you?
But is that not a part of the experience? Do you want to watch someone play medieval with the music off?
You asked me how I would deal with it, and my first thing was, okay, if we have to turn it off, then you're going to lose all the explosions and sounds of a gun reloading and all that kind of stuff, aren't you? If you have to mute everything.
Yeah.
I'm not advocating for it. I'm just saying that's what I would do first.
We are privileged in that this podcast, starting in the institution that it started with, we learned certain rules and certain things as far as including music here. I'm not going to give up the game here because I'm not. I just think that that's something that's we're going to see unfold more and more. And if there's a vaccine or not, I don't know. But what can the orchestras do if they can't stream the music? It looks like they have to go completely with original compositions, or at least contemporary, compositions. Right. It looks like you just have to commission the women and the people of color in your community to write something new so that your video isn't flagged. So,
what day was it that I said the first orchestra that programs an all-black season wins?
That was a while ago.
So now let's alter that. The first orchestra that programs an all-new music season wins.
That'll be something too. But it's easy
to go. They could put it online.
But it's easy to go inequitable there. It'll be Philip Glass, John Cage, and who else?
Steve Reich.
Speaking of contemporary white mid composers, look at this. I wanted to transition out of this little bit of the conversation with a piece of music by Adam Schoenberg. But I got here in my mind, we were talking before we cut on the mics, if we do get the $2,000, what are you going to do with it? So what are you going to do with yours?
Well, I actually did want to put a little bit of it out into the economy. And I know a guy who does custom cabinets, and I need a new vanity in the bathroom. So I was thinking about paying him to build me a bathroom vanity.
Look at you, a day early. Well,
what is that? What is that tenant in Kwanzaa?
That's what I was going to say. A day early, Ujamaa.
That's it.
But see, is he black though?
I don't know.
Well, if he's black, you're especially in Ujamaa.
Right, I've seen. I've seen his work online, but I actually haven't seen the artist.
Well, if he is not black, just tell him, now look, I need you to be anti-racist while you're building this cabinet, okay? I need you to think about. As a matter of fact, let me cut on this opus of Trilloquy. Listen to this while you're putting on the cabinet.
Yeah, I'm sure that's what we'll do.
Anyway, so you're talking about the cabinet. So what that made me think about is my living space. As you know, if folks go on my Instagram, sometimes you can see I really prefer the red lighting. When I was working overnight, it helped me, stay in the middle. Now I just like the aesthetic. We added red lights to the bathroom recently, so I really like that. Red is the name of a movement of a piece of music that I've been returning to in these past months. Again, I said his name is Adam Schoenberg. The work is called Finding Rothko. If you know who the painter Rothko is, you can imagine this music sort of as a musical interpretation of what he does with the colors and the blocks. Anyway, the red movement speaks to not only the color red on a painting, but red feelings and red emotions. Life isn't always pretty, and neither is music, but even through all of the ruckusness of it, this ruckusness of 2020 even, there comes a little bit of peace. And I think this excerpt from Finding Rothko really exhibits that well. Finding Rothko by Adam Schoenberg, a really phenomenal. I had the pleasure of performing it. The final movement is really touching. But anyway, fingers crossed for the stimulus. I want my two bands. And if it's got to be 6 stacks, give me that.
I don't know what you're talking about. Is that what goes around $1,000 when it's stacked up?
Mine.
Okay. I'm just trying to understand.
Okay, so since this is the last opus of Trilloquy for 2020, Scott and I thought that we might sort of underscore or rehash conversations or opuses from this year, just in case you're new to the show and want to go back, or just in case you want to hash it out yourself. So what's your opus pick for 2020, Scott?
Opus 57.
Talk to me.
Do you remember that one?
Not off the top of my head.
You want me to read a little bit of the caption that you wrote for that opus?
Oh, gosh. And I'm going to be critiquing my own writing. Here we go.
Cancel culture has rocked the world of social media for a while now. But a man named Paul Robeson was once canceled by the U.S. government in real life. Garrett chats with... Is it Cesar?
Yes. Shout out to Cesar.
Cesar Saavedra about that's fun to say. Cesar Saavedra about the often overlooked legacy of Mr. Robeson, and Scott tackles the cognitive dissonance of being an ally while maintaining a position of power.
Look at you making the show description. Okay, now you make that voice and all that, but I want to make sure people understand. The government tried. Well, Caesar would say that he would not say this on the mic. I'll say that based on the reading that I've done and the research I've done, because, me and Caesar were working on a book, and Paul Robeson was a huge part of it. The government tried to get him out of here. And there are a lot of people who will say that.
Caesar?
So, no, Paul Robeson.
Oh, okay.
So when we talk about cancel culture, it's one thing to be like, oh, well, no one wants to follow you on Twitter or anything. But it's another thing for a governmental body to try to cancel you. And Paul Robeson, is one example. We can talk about the FBI's involvement in the killing of Martin Luther King Jr. To this day, the Nation of Islam talks about how the FBI played an integral role in the killing of Malcolm X. So it's cancel culture. I mean, it's the extremes can really be something.
But you remember I asked you at one point if there was ever a moment when you were nervous about it for yourself. Okay. You want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, I think that it's funny. So you chose Opus 57. When I looked back, I chose Opus 56 because that's where we talked about Louis Farrakhan. There were a lot of people who were upset about it. And there were, what was interesting, Scott, is that there were a lot of people, an equal amount of people who were like, yes, thank you. We had no idea. We were really celebrating it. And the unfortunate thing, and I had a conversation with Joshua Weilerstein. Shout out to him. Wow, that was this year. A lot of stuff happened this year.
I got copied on a couple emails that you received as well. There was some pointed.
So what was so the connection there was, I thought they were going to cancel me. I thought they were done with TRILLOQUY. Thank you for being here right now. What was your perspective on the Honorable Louis Farrakhan then versus now?
That was what the gentleman who I was copied in on the email was writing about, the use of honorable. Boy, he was hot over that.
Right.
Now, here's the thing. It did not rattle me at all because I don't have knowledge of all of Farrakhan's history.
Yeah.
And
it's problematic. I'll be the first to say.
I just know that whenever his name comes up, a lot of people in the room have strong negative reactions.
What was something for me to see was, aside from the emails and the comment box things, which are all valid, I affirm all perspectives when it comes to this. On my personal Facebook thread, it got a little hot. And the line was very clearly drawn along racial lines. And it was discouraging, but it also showed me the impact that Louis Farrakhan has had on Black communities, especially in this case, a Black arts community. Talking about his collaboration with the Black orchestra that he was with. I lost a friend, a dear friend, over that opus.
Wow.
Like it was a lot. And looking back, Scott, I have to say, I don't regret putting it out there, because folks who know who Louis Farrakhan is, for the good or for the bad, I'm sure they did not know that he was a violinist. And I think it's interesting to highlight that intersection.
And we spoke with Amanda Cook that opus, and
Yeah,
I
shout
remember,
out to her.
I remember,
I care if you listen.
I remember very clearly we had the conversation of that was a no-win opus, because if people weren't upset with the fact that you were featuring Farrakhan, it's that his technique was terrible. So it was you were going to get it one way or the other.
I think that might have been the first and only double guest opus, because we had Caroline Jones as well, who actually played the concert with Farrakhan, and was the personnel manager, and dealt with all of the fruits of Islam, and has a picture with Farrakhan himself. That's the photo I chose for that opus. So, man, if I could go back, I would do it. I would still put it out. There's some sound quality things that I would have done different.
Sure.
But maybe I would have approached the conversation with a little bit more sensitivity, because as a Black person who grew up not villainizing Louis Farrakhan, it was sort of new to me, even considering the homophobic stuff that he said, and the damaging patriarchal things that he upholds. I just did not have the perspective of some of my Jewish friends. And I guess I wish that I had understood that beforehand a little bit better so that I could engage the conversation a little more. Like him or hate him, Louis Farrakhan is very consequential and very impactful on Black communities. And for this Black leader to also be someone who has affirmed so-called classical music and Black musicians who do it, I think that is very important to note. I think it's also important to note that he has said and done some things that are very harmful to many, many communities.
Look at both of us concerned about cancel culture from our own different perspectives.
Look at us trying to get clean for 2021.
Well, I don't know about that. There might be a couple things to just line up and, sort of dust off. But I don't think I wouldn't change anything I did or said over the last year. Would you?
Moving on. No. It's hard to address that, but we'll get into some of that in the Trilloquy.
All right.
Moving on into so that's checking the accidentals. I'm gonna put a natural by the stimulus and the streaming because I'm hoping to get a check, and it feels natural to just wait at this point. I don't know. That's what I got.
Yeah. What is time anyway?
With the what overarching accidental do you want to give Opus 57?
Opus 57,
the
natural.
Cancel culture opus.
Natural.
A good natural.
Yeah.
With Opus 56, the one about Louis Farrakhan, I'm going to give it a sharp because I learned a lot. It was my opportunity to be more engaged. I felt very engaged by the Black folk who listened. I felt very challenged in a good way by the folks who called issues. So I appreciate that, and I appreciated revisiting Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto in E minor. Everyone knows it, who's in classical music, but I just think there is something about it that's so magical. I'm not going to share Louis Farrakhan's rendition because I don't need it from y'all this week. So this is Aunt Sophie Mutter with the I think it's the Gewandhaus Orchestra is the
that's what you said.
Is the recording we chose because at the beginning, I don't even want you to fade this in. I want people to hear at the beginning that first note. They really figured out, the orchestra, how to make it sound like they had been playing it all along, and the audience is the one who came in. The orchestra didn't come in, the audience, and that just comes with the whole orchestra breathing and again, collective work and responsibility, just that spirit of Ujima, everyone coming in together. And here we are, and here we go with this incredible piece of music. Here's a little bit of the opening, as much as we're legally allowed to stream anyway, of Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto in E minor.
So you like the way the violin comes in on the Mendelssohn, and yet you don't with the Sibelius? Am I remembering correctly?
No. The Sibelius is an incredible piece of the Sibelius Violin Concerto.
Wait. It was somebody else that was telling me that. Never mind.
Yeah, and tell them that they're wrong.
100%. Yeah, we agree on that.
Look at us caping for the white men composers at the end of the year. And speaking of which, no. So in this second movement, so for today, this New Year's opus, I thought that Scott and I would rehash some things musically, tell you what has been moving us the most this year, and also what we just listened to the most based on the numbers. But getting the second movement started here is a little mini category that we're calling Be Sure to Listen. So this is kind of our honorable mention portion, something that we want to make sure we mention before we leave the year of 2020. How about you get us going?
You remember a few opuses ago I brought in music by blind Tom Wiggins, the slave who was blind, autistic, and a music savant.
Yeah.
Spent 12 hours a day, every day, being paraded around and made millions of dollars for the people who owned him.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was watching 60 Minutes last night because I'm 50, and they did a story on a man named Matthew Whitaker, 19 years old, blind from birth, and they were trying to get him to start interacting and come out of his shell, and music was the only thing that did it. And they put a small piano, a kid's piano, in front of him, and a lot of kids will go up and bang on it, but he was using both hands, so even from a young age he was like really in tune to music. Well, you know how Blind Tom was treated as a novelty or a sideshow act or something like that. They actually, Matthew's parents actually made sure that he had the best instruction and was given all the tools that he needed to be successful in something that he actually had the talent for. So the woman that taught him how to read music in Braille, number one, imagine trying to visualize music that way, right? Mentalize music that way. So he goes to hear his new teacher play, and they did the Dvorak Piano Quintet. The next day for their first class, she walks in and he's sitting there playing the piano part from the quintet, having heard it once. So that's the kind of talent that he has. He also is a drummer, composer, arranger, and now band leader. His most recent release came out in 2019, and it has the track that I want you to go and check out called Bernie's Tune, which is actually by Gerry Mulligan. But the way that he handles it is such a nice, familiar sound to it. So this is a little bit of Bernie's Tune. His whole album is something for me that as I was listening to it, I just felt like I was in a much larger city with New Year close, and there was sort of an electricity in the air. Basically, Matthew's release sort of painted the aesthetic, and it got me feeling like I was in some sort of hip locale waiting for people, because I was doing a little cooking as I listened, and I kind of pretended like people were on their way over or whatever. And this is an amazing album to have on in the background. His 2017 debut, you might also want to check out, is called Out of the Box.
I'm sitting here moved, getting glassy-eyed, thinking about the dedication someone has to have to make sure to get that those Braille notes in. I don't know how to read Braille music notes or how to teach that. But when we talk about equity, that's what we're talking about. And a few opuses back, again, with the vibrating bodysuits, if you remember, we were talking about that. I mentioned how all of us in the arts, whatever little corner of it we're in, need to start thinking more about the issue of ableism and being more accessible in that way. Wow. I got some work to do. I need to learn my Braille notes.
I have a hard time doing it with my eyes. But imagine the way his brain works.
Yeah.
And they showed him in an MRI, and they played a little bit of just like a boring lecture, and there was just no brain activity. They played a little bit of his favorite band, Snarky Puppy, and it lit up with his brain lit up with every single color. Just imagining the way that his brain works and how he can play something back after one listen. Amazing improviser as a jazz pianist. Just check out Matthew Whitaker.
Yeah. Well, my honorable mention, my be sure to listen, you went back to Blind Tom Wiggins. I wanted to go back and shout out, again, I forget the opus number, but Christine Gangelhoff from here in Minnesota, but teaches down at the University of the Bahamas. She brought to me, put on my radar, a piece of music by a Bahamian composer, a black Bahamian composer down there. His name is Christian Justilien. And again, it was on the Opus. It's on the TRILLOQUY Tracks playlist. But this suite that talks about the Bahamas, a little bit of the history, and offering that general aesthetic with a piano, a euphonium, and a flute. Christine Gangahoff playing the flute. And when I think about that music, I go back to it so much because I think that's really what represents what I'm trying to see, what we're trying to see in so-called classical music. It has the ingredients, okay? So for the people who are afraid of a beat machine or a drum set or whatever, doesn't have any of that. We're just talking about three so-called classical instruments here. But the aesthetic really centers something that is not Western European. It's something that really is, Bahamian in spirit in every way. I mean, that first movement, I think, is the perfect morning music. You hear the flute, the way Christine plays that flute. It's, it's like that fun bird outside. Let's say if you're waking up over in Norway, you hear, the birds singing that very old classical tune. Well, you got the cool birds, down in the Bahamas, just the colorful birds that are, anyway. That's the mind that's the path my mind goes down when I wake up and do my morning rituals. And I listen to this music and it's like I go down there to the Bahamas on those cold Minnesota mornings when I think it's 3 degrees out there right now. Listening to that music just reminds me of when I was on the beach down in the Bahamas. And music can do that, and it can be fun and it can be relevant. So here's a little bit of that. I want to make sure that y'all hear that again. So just think about it, Scott. As cultural as that is, and as much as we don't mind really celebrating something that sounds like that, that classic music, that classical music, why can't we incorporate a voice and a beat machine if another culture says this is what's foundational to their society and their perspective on music and all that sort of thing?
Why can't we? Or...
Why can't we? We always like to draw these lines about what can be classical. So again, with Seaforce, the ensemble Seahorse, C-Force, it's flute, piano, euphonium. What if instead of piano, it was the Ableton Push, okay? And all of the sounds that can make, all of the beats, all of the different aesthetics it can create. I think we have to consider more, and listening to that music that's really rooted in Bahamian culture helps give me perspective on how we can continue to affirm classical music as something that is much broader than we've been taught.
I think the closer we get to not having all of the old identifiers as to what classical music is, as soon as we can change people's minds that it doesn't have to be orchestral or chamber or whatever from the 1800s, we'll be a lot closer.
Yeah.
Until we shed the old definition and what we expect of it, that's not going to happen until we shed that.
I hope we can shed that in less than 10 to 15 years, but we'll see.
Yo.
So a couple just quick hits now. So for this next one, Scott, I thought it would be fun to just let the people know, based on the data that's collected on our phones through the DSPs we use to listen to music, what is our most listened to track, just by the numbers. So for this podcast, I like to say, keep it trill. Megan Thee Stallion said something slightly different.
I'd rather keep it real with ya. Real hot girl shit. It ain't always about what you like, sometimes it's about what's right. I'd rather be a B.I.T.C.H, cause that's what you gon' call me when I'm tripping anyway. You know you can't control me, baby. You need a real one in your life. The bitches ain't gon' give it to you right. I'd rather be a
So I think that is my most played tune because I played it every day in the car on my way to work when I was going to NPR. Basically, what Megan the Stallion, what I get from that. I understand what she's saying about women empowerment and reframing, taking ownership of that word that I want, the B word that I will not say. What I took from that was, I have to continue on and push forward and do what I do. And if this colleague or if this person wants to call me difficult, or they want to call me insert code word for I'm not being respectable, so be it. So that's just what I got from that Megan Thee Stallion song. That's why I played it every day on my way to work, sometimes on my way home from work. Even now in the mornings, I listen to it just as, kind of a pep rally tune when you're trying to get yourself together for that first Zoom call. At least that's how I do it.
Yeah.
So shout out to Megan Thee Stallion. We talked about her a lot this year, didn't we?
We did. Well, you did, and I tried to keep up.
Okay, what did you press play on the most in 2020?
You remember how over the moon I was on that one Joe Pera Talks to You episode with the lighthouse and the power outage and that? I forget what the title of it is. Aaron Esposito has a track. I forget what the whole album is, but each track is titled just whatever number it is. Track 9 is used in that Joe Pera episode, and I played the snot out of that thing. It's only like 1:09, but that 1:09 brings up so much different emotion inside. It makes me feel different things depending on where I'm at that particular moment. But if you remember that episode at the beginning, Joe is wrestling with the feeling of not being necessary. Okay, his girlfriend is a prepper. She doesn't need him in a power outage. He should probably just stay where he's at and be safe. and his Nana doesn't need him because she's got a fully charged iPad, so she's good to go. But at the end of it, he finds that there are things that he can offer. There are things that he contribute. And I think that after the year that we have had, I think that all of us have had at least one thing, one realization throughout this past year that we can do that makes us invaluable.
It's so interesting to me. I know I say things are interesting a lot. It's so interesting to me, Scott, that you were so drawn to that, because that's a conversation that we engage off the mic oftentimes when it comes to Trilloquy, when it comes to this show. We'll get into it in a little bit of the fourth movement, but I love that you love that show. I love that we were able to introduce it to you.
Absolutely.
And you're the fan now more than us. Shout out to Joe Pera. I love that show, but you really dove in.
There is Steve Martin level comedy happening there. Just amazing comedy. And I'll say it again, Joe as a producer is really thinking on multiple different levels. And the choice of that song and the way he used it, chef's kiss.
So beyond what you clicked play on the most, when you think about a piece of music just in general in your peripheral that sort of is 2020 for you, when you think back to 2020, the tune, the music that is the bed for that, what is it for you?
You remember that Kronos Quartet track, My President Sang Amazing Grace?
Yeah.
I must be feeling sappy here at the end of nostalgic here at the end of the year or something, because again, that track is so hopeful. And the Kronos Quartet teamed up with vocalist Meklit on that, and just such an amazing example of power through restraint. She did not go over the top once, and yet it just, boom, grabs you and holds on. And that song that kind of kept me going throughout the last year, for sure.
But no words could say what must be said for all the living and the dead. So on that day and in that place,
Our president sang Amazing Grace. The president sang Amazing Grace.
That was definitely one that got me in the feels, and every time I go back to it, I'm right back in the feels.
Well, I think that the fact that the Kronos Quartet, when you see their name, you can expect something interesting, something different, something not the norm. I think that they have made themselves out to be. That is very, very impressive. I saw people talking about The President Sings Amazing Grace apart from TRILLOQUY and apart from your talking about it. So it's one of those tracks that really got to the people. It was a really incredible one. When I was down in Knoxville on the radio, there's an album called Floodplains that features the Kronos Quartet that I wore out. And it was some so-called world music, but just sounds that are so different and yet so beautiful and so engaging. So I like that the Kronos Quartet has been able to team up with folks like Meklit and create music that so many people can love. I think the Kronos Quartet is an example, again, of what certain arts institutions could be. In the same way that you see the name Kronos Quartet and think, oh, they're going to do something that's cool, that's this or that. We could have the same thing with insert institution here, insert radio station here, insert conservatory here.
Yeah.
I wonder who's going to jump out and do it. I guess we'll see. Well, for the final piece of music we're going to throw at you for the second movement, my In the Feels. So when I think about the year 2020, as I always think about race, it's there, but to a heightened degree when you think about Breonna Taylor and Elijah McClain, George Floyd, all these people, but also the positive that I've been able to do. So one of the things that I'm most proud of out of 2020 was getting to host and produce Gateways Radio for the Gateways Music Festival. I was also given a really great feature on WQXR. Shout out to everyone over there, me and the TRILLOQUY podcast. And I actually didn't remember giving them that quote, but I told them that a piece of music that was really impactful for me this year was James Cockerham's arrangement of Lift Every Voice. And again, this is one that I closed and opened my Gateways Radio with. I've gone back and listened to this video a cajillion times. There's a virtual orchestra version that I'm involved with, that I played. It takes the Negro National Anthem, Lift Every Voice, presents it in its traditional form, mixes in some blues and jazz, mixes in some of the indigenous sounds to shout out those people. It's a really incredible arrangement. And beyond just that arrangement, I've been listening to on the internet the version that my friend Anthony Parther led with the Southeast Symphony over in California. Anthony Parther, Scott, by the way, conducted the score to The Mandalorian. So you're hearing his work every time you watch that show. I'm working to get him on the podcast. So I listened to his rendition, and I listened to so many other renditions. There's a woodwind quintet version that I put in my Kwanzaa radio special for the radio stations this year. I think I did last year as well, by Imani Wins. So the more I just become familiar with that tune, just being able to sing the tune. Shout out to Beyonce, who included it in There's Your TRILLOQUY Drinking Game, who included it in in the Homecoming. I am ready to say goodbye to the Star Spangled Banner. It's a problematic tune. It's got verses in there that's specifically speaking to slavery. Let's just switch it on over to the Negro National Anthem, Lift Every Voice, because I have, so everyone else needs to. A lot of black people have.
And I remember when we talked about this before, your other suggestion there was In the Mood by Glenn Miller, so you got a choice.
I've gone this whole podcast so far without cussing, and you're trying me. I have a choice between Glenn Miller? Glenn Miller and the Negro National Anthem. Okay, Scott.
These were both your suggestions.
I know. I'm joking with you, but think about it. How powerful. And the Louisville Orchestra, started or is planning to start their next season instead of the Star Spangled Banner with Lift Every Voice. Think about watching the Olympic Games, and let's say a black person wins in something historic like fencing. I think a black person still, it can't be that. It can't be that. But think about watching.
It's got to be something.
And think about watching, and it's Lift Every Voice.
Yeah.
That's powerful. Yeah. That is so powerful.
No,
so
you're not wrong.
Here's and before I let you hear a little bit of it, I wanted to tell you a little bit about Quanice Floyd. So if you go way back, I think she was the guest on Opus 15 of TRILLOQUY. Quanice Floyd is the leader of the Arts Administrators of Color Network. Quanice Floyd is also the author of an op-ed that, again, I'll put in the description of this opus that was calling out the Americans for the Arts for not really doing what they said they were going to do when it comes to racial equity in the arts. So because, we talked about it so much over these past few weeks, especially as it has to do with stuff going on in New York, where Streets is done, I thought that I would have her on. She was so gracious to spend the time with me. So we talk about holding folks accountable. We talk a little bit about Kwanzaa, actually, and some of the things that she wants to see moving forward. So here's an excerpt from James Cockerham's arrangement of Lift Every Voice. And here's my conversation with Quanice Floyd.
I was formerly a public school music teacher for almost 10 years. And so, one of the things I really, really wanted to do was bring my students into the classroom. I wanted them to see themselves as artists and musicians and composers. And so I teach in the DC area primarily. I taught in Baltimore County, in Montgomery County, DC public schools. And so one of the main pieces of Black culture there is go-go music. And so during the 1960s and 70s, go-go ended up being developed because when James Brown would go on tour, he would have these little intermission sets where he would go on. And whenever he came to DC, they would have Chuck Brown and Chuck Brown's band members, play as a part of his backup. And so during those intermission pieces, they would just kind of jam out, just improvise and do all of this and make it real funky. And then after a while, they started bringing in the bongos and they started bringing in these polyrhythmic rhythms. And it was just really, really fascinating. And over time, it just developed into a brand new genre. And so go-go over the years, over the past 40 years, has kind of evolved, just like hip hop has evolved. And so now you have different types of go-go where you'll see the kids beating their feet, and they have the bounce go-go where it's just a real hard type of beat. Mm-hmm. And so I tried to incorporate that into my school curriculum, even though it wasn't a part of my school curriculum because it's mostly European curriculum, I roll. And so my students loved it. They were just having fun with it. We created go-go's. They would come up with their own songs. They would work in groups together to come up with beats. They thought they was the next Junkyard Band. And if y'all don't know who Junkyard Band is, look them up. And so, I would never forget this for the rest of my life, because this is the kind of the pivot point in my life as an educator where I was I need to do more for my students. And, we were doing the go-go. I had created a whole unit on go-go for my middle school students. And we were doing it one time, and the principal came in and she just looked mad. And I was why is she upset? She was stop playing that noise. And I was what? Did she really just say that to these kids? They were excited. They were writing. I mean, of course, when you come in a music classroom, I always tell people it's organized chaos, right? You always hear a whole bunch of things going on. The kids know what they're doing. I know what the kids are doing. They focus. They doing what they got to do. But when somebody from the outside comes looking in, they're what the hell is this? But if you go up and ask one of the kids what they're doing, they're going to tell you. And so she came in and was just I guess the noise was too much for her, or the sound. I don't want to call it noise. The sound was too much for her. And she was just came in and she was stop this noise right now. What is this noise? And the kids look Miss Floyd. Like they were looking at me. I was like, what are you talking about?
They were like, get your boss.
I was like, they're composing music. They don't need to play this noise. Why aren't they singing? And I was like, oh my God. I just could, at that point, I didn't even have the words, because if I had the words, I probably would have blew up on that teacher and got fired right then and there. On that principal. So I was just kind of like internalized that and was like, yo, I got to do better for our kids somehow, some way. And it has to be outside the classroom, because I can only do what the principal allows me to do within my classroom. But if once I'm out of the classroom, then I'll have more power to look at the system as a whole to make some changes. And so that's when I started beginning like my transition out of the classroom. So
now that the classroom isn't the classroom as it were because of COVID and everything else, do you think that this has left children more or less vulnerable to cultural incompetencies like those?
I think it depends on the teacher, right? Like, if you go some places, like I know really good, because I'm still in the DC, Maryland area. So right now I'm an advocate for, I'm considered a lobbyist for arts education in the public school system. But, I know some really good ass teachers who are doing like amazing remote teaching as music educators, as visual art educators. And then in other places, it's like there's people who just gave up. So it just depends where you are, right? It just, it depends on that teacher. It depends on what they're willing to, and teachers also vary too, right? Like some teachers are gonna, bust their ass to make sure that the kids get what they're supposed to get. And then other teachers, they're like, well, I'm retiring in 2-3 years anyway. So blah, 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 blah. There's just different attitudes you got to deal with. Yeah. So I just really think it depends on the area. It depends on the teacher. But I know Baltimore City, they have some phenomenal teachers. Prince George's County has some phenomenal teachers. So around the whole Maryland area, I think overall they're doing really, really good. But, you'll still find those little pockets of where there's some incompetence happening. And I'm not saying that the teachers themselves are incompetent, but I think because of the times and the way things have changed, it's hard for some folks to keep up, right? Like,
right.
If you've been teaching 40, 50 years in the classroom and then all of a sudden you have to go remote, like you're scrambling. You're not really understanding like how you're going to adapt to this new positioning. So.
Yeah, that agility is something that, we see a lack of in a lot of these institutions, some of which have, failed and are dark right now. Others you have called out. We'll get to that here in a second. But before we jumped into that, the other thing that I wanted to refresh folks on is the fact that you exposed me to the idea of giving land acknowledgments. So when I give public speeches and things from my home anyway, from Zoom, I always tell folks that I'm calling in from the land of the Sioux, specifically the Wapakute of the Eastern Dakota, and I'm very proud and happy to be able to understand that. Thanks to you. I wonder, just in a nutshell, if you could speak to the importance of land acknowledgments from your perspective and why you go out of your way to, to maintain that equitable practice in your work.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, history matters, right? Like, and not just history, but the truth. It matters. Like we have to honor truth. We have to honor the things that have happened here. And when we talk about land acknowledgements, we're not just talking about, we're bringing highlight, especially to folks whose land this belonged to before colonialization, imperialism, colonialism, and all of that. But then also thinking about the history, right? Like imagine doing a land acknowledgement in Tulsa, Oklahoma, right? Like not only are you honoring the indigenous people, but you're also talking about the history of the massacre, right? Like these people who had created almost a Mecca, a Black Mecca in Tulsa, right? And so like you have to acknowledge that, and because without all of that history, you wouldn't be where you are in this place right now.
Exactly.
And so I just really, really think that people have to be like, and it's so difficult for arts institutions in general to even acknowledge the history of their institution. But they're quick to acknowledging land, but it's the same practice. You have to acknowledge what has happened in this place for you to be where you are at this moment right now. So yeah, right now I'm in the land of the Lenape. I'm in New York City. I live in DC, which is the land of the Nacotchtank, the Piscataway, and the Pamunkey. And so like I always think about those ancestors who were there, and just even thinking about like DC and New York, New York City had Seneca Village, which was a Black, community. And then they built Central Park over it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they just got rid of them. DC, the historical value of that was that they were chocolate city. There's gentrification happening. You have to acknowledge all of that history that's there. Yeah, I just think that's powerful for people to be able to do that. But then, that I guess is a contradictory piece is that they acknowledge that, and like a lot of arts institutions acknowledge where they are, but they don't acknowledge their place in all of that either.
Yeah.
Um,
That's something
So,
that
yeah.
I've been thinking about and talking about a lot when it comes to the New York institutions. Me and Scott have constantly been saying streets is done in New York with the arts because the Met is dark, the New York Phil is dark, so many of these other institutions. How does that make you feel as a New Yorker? I'm sure growing up, Carnegie Hall, for example, was just such an institution, but to see it toppled over by COVID, it must strike a chord with you in some way. Or maybe it doesn't.
I don't know. Everybody always talks about those institutions, but growing up as a kid, those weren't like, we'd take school trips there, but you didn't really understand the value of those institutions as a kid.
There was no
And
real
I played in,
connection.
and I played in All City. We had Borough-wide Orchestra and we had All City Orchestra here, and I played in both. And so I played at Lincoln Center and I played at Carnegie Hall. And my grandmother saw me on stage at Carnegie Hall. Like she loved it. Like for her, it was a big deal. And then for me, I was just like, oh, I'm just on this stage, right? Like, I don't know. I just, maybe because I was a little bit, maybe as you grow up, you're just oblivious to the things. As a kid, you're just seeing big buildings and you're like so used to the big buildings that you're not thinking about the powers of those institutions. You're just thinking, oh, my grandmother wants to see me at Carnegie Hall, and now I'm here, and now I'm doing this for her, right? I'm not even thinking about this. I'm thinking about grandma.
Right.
Right. So, I mean, I don't want to say I'm neither here nor there on that, but I feel like there's a lot more that those institutions probably could do to reach out to little kids who were like me growing up in the city. And I think the city's a little bit different now, but because of all the gentrification that's happening. But ask my classmates. Like I went to a performing arts high school and like we just wanted to make it, right? We just wanted to get by every day. We wasn't really worried about Carnegie Hall. I think the only Broadway show I saw as a kid was Phantom of the Opera because we had to.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's interesting because what you're speaking to, people not really seeing the power in those buildings. I think you can speak to that conversely as well. The folks in those buildings not understanding the power of the folks that are walking along those sidewalks and passing by every day with no real reason to engage. Did you hear about the Robert Smith drama at Carnegie Hall and hiding a lot of money? Long story short, and we talked about this on the show last week, but the chair for their board was caught like trying to hide $200 million from the government, but the board, was like, oh well, Carnegie Hall was like, well, he's fine. We see no reason. He's rectified it. When we see all of these large dollar amounts thrown around in the arts, 200 million here. I think they talked about a 182 million tax refund for the organization. What is being done with all of this money?
Right.
I mean, and that was one of the points, that you brought up in the article that, your op-ed that started so much energy, I'll say, in the arts administration community, specifically talking about AFTA, all of the money they have, their endowments, the promises they've made, and the lack of accountability therein. So, first and foremost, why AFTA? There are a lot of organizations out here that have given so much so-called woke statements that they haven't lived up to. Why is AFTA an important organization to seek that accountability from?
So I guess it could have been anyone, right? But I happen to be on AFTA's Arts Education Network, which is a national network, and I was elected by my peers in the AFTA network to be on this network, to be on this council. And so I feel like I had a responsibility, right? Like in I'm being elected by people who trust me. Like, you know, when you think about elections, you have to, you think about the people, right? A lot of these institutions don't think about the people. I think about the people all the time. That's what I think about people. People is centered to a lot of the work that I do. And helping people is like part of it's like my morals, right? Like I want to make sure I'm helping others. And so because in 2018, I was the Emerging Arts Leader awardee from AFTA. I already had some connections there and some input there. And then being elected earlier this year onto this council, I was like, I just felt like I had an obligation to the people who are part of the network who elected me to be on the council. And so, you know, I went to the orientation in January. We went to Sacramento. You know, we had a great time. It was an amazing group of people who were on the council with me and had conversations about a lot of things. But it seemed like there was a lot of confusion as to like what exactly, you know, we're supposed to, how much our words matter, right? Mm-hmm. If we're in an advisory role that's supposed to support the work of AFTA and what they do in arts education, you know, what do they listen? What do they listen to? What we have to say? What do they like hear versus like what do they actually take in and consider and put into execution? And so, you know, we had amazing conversation with the council members, and, you know, we just really was wanting to support AFTA any way that we could. We're working on the ground. A lot of us work in the communities, right? We're on the ground, helping kids, helping families, helping elders, right? Like, and we want to just be able to bring that back to AFTA and have them create a more holistic view of what arts education looks like. Because if you think about it in general, arts education to me is the stepchild of education and it's the stepchild of the arts, right? And so people often talk about arts education last, but arts education is the one that brings in the most money because we're talking about future, right? We're talking about kids, we're talking about investment in education, we're talking about all of that. And so when we talk about you know, the work that we're doing, we're trying to figure out like, hey, how can we better serve arts education so that it's no longer a stepchild of both the arts and both education? Mm-hmm. And so we try to have these conversations over and over. And, you know, there's never like a final answer on anything. You know, we try to come up with different strategies to help, you know, support education policies, but then also including the arts, but then also supporting arts, you know, you have all these policies going through the NEA and with COVID and, you know, and also including education, right? And so, you know, we just wanted to make sure that we were supporting the work that AFTA did as best as we could based on the knowledge and experience of those who we know are most affected by these policies.
You're really hitting on something when you talk about the responsibility of being in a role like that. The word inclusion, the phrase diversity, inclusion, equity is on everybody's lips. You know, I'm thinking about that inclusion part because it's more than just being in the room. It's taking responsibility for your seat at that table or whatever you want to call it. In my reading, in my keeping up with everything that you're doing, the name Andrew Lee has come up a lot. I wanted to make sure that I gave him a shout out for all the incredible things happening in the Washington, D.C. area. From your perspective, you know, the work that you're doing, the work that Andrew Lee is doing, you know, there's so many folks on the ground when it comes to arts administration. What does this mean for the bigger picture, as I like to think of it? There's someone, you know, listening right now who's never met an arts administrator, maybe doesn't even have kids. Why is this work so pivotal to the bigger picture of demolishing anti-racism and the other things that are holding us back?
Right. And I think what people don't notice about the arts is that culture, right? Arts and culture go hand in hand. And so when you think about, let me just take a step back. One thing that I truly dislike around conversations around arts education is when people say, we need to bring the arts to this community, or we need to bring the arts to that community, when there's already arts and culture in that community that people aren't utilizing. And you're discounting that arts and culture in that community because you want to bring whatever your European-centric arts to that community. And so, like, I feel like one, we miss the mark on that all the time by saying that there's no arts in that community or no culture in that community. But then two, by understanding that there is arts and culture in that community, that is the way that you build communication and connections to people. And so, like, to me, like, when you're thinking about anti-racism, you're understanding that there's other arts and cultures, right? Like, you're understanding that you can communicate to people or through people through their arts and their culture. And I just feel like we miss the mark on that all the time. Like I hear it, even I'm a DC commissioner for the arts and humanities, and we hear it all the time. They're like, well, we need to bring the arts to Ward 8, or we need to bring the arts to Ward 7. There is arts there. Stop that. There's arts there already. You just haven't taken the time to go into the community and talk to the folks and see what they do. There's so many small grassroots organizations that are doing works of multi-million-dollar institutions on a $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 budget. And nobody says anything. And it's like, everybody always like, well, what can we learn from these big institutions? No, what can we learn from these smaller institutions that have actually made an impact in our communities? And I'm not sure this is answering the question, but I just feel like there's ways that we need to better understand one another's culture. And I feel like the arts is that key piece to that. Key, everybody says, oh, everybody knows the language of music, or everybody knows blah, 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 blah. Right. And so, but nobody puts that into place. Like nobody actually brings that along. Like exactly when you think about like in the concept of my principal, right? Music is a language. And so when you're coming in the classroom, you see students and you're thinking, you're calling this noise, but students are speaking to us right now. Mm-hmm. They're talking to us through this language of go-go music, or through this language of jazz music, or through this language of house music, right? They're talking to us. And I just think we miss the mark on that all the time as arts institutions.
So what is the role, or from your perspective, what is going to be the role of these larger institutions, considering the fact that there are so many smaller ones that are doing the good work, that are enriching communities, enriching individuals? Do we need the large institutions to survive?
So, that's a good question. Do we need that's a loaded question. Do we need it? Because immediately I would just, the responsibility for them is to really build relationships into the communities. Like they need to see what's happening. And honestly, people need to give up some of those resources, right? Yeah, people keep playing. I see a lot of grant,
Money specifically.
Money specifically. People keep playing, and I've seen a lot of big institutions who I don't want to say the word coerce, but it is a way of coercing smaller institutions into their grants. Or they try to manipulate smaller institutions and write them into their grants. We've seen that. As a grant panelist and a commissioner of an arts and humanities, I've seen that. Where someone will literally say, "I've seen my name in a grant application, and I did not say I could be in there." So people, they're stealing, right? Like, you're taking from people who are doing really good work.
Yeah.
And so some of those larger institutions need to step aside and really think about what type of impact that they're creating. Honestly, some of them might not even really care what type of impact that's creating. They just want to bring in the dollars. Mm-hmm. But a lot of institutions really need to think critically about the impact that they're creating and how to actually bringing in these smaller institutions, or learning from these smaller institutions, not bringing in, but learning from these smaller institutions and making a true connection to communities that they haven't been connected to.
Yeah. I've been trying to be more, especially going into the new year, be more goal oriented, really have something specific to shoot for when it comes to the small projects and the bigger things. I think what my biggest goal is in my work is for all instrumental sounds, all sounds that are classic and foundational to a culture, to be affirmed as classical music. So the example that I often give is that the timpani and the djembe are both classical instruments that should have equal footing, in the space. That's sort of the things that I think about. What do you think about in your work? What is the reality you want to see for the little black girl who's 10 years old going to her music class when it's all said and done? It will never be done, but let's just use that phrase anyway. When it's all said and done, what do you hope for that little black girl or that little black boy going to his music classroom?
So I'm going to bring up a video I saw probably in the last week, and it was Cardi B. I don't know if you've seen this. And she was doing a dance class in the Bronx. No, she was still in the Bronx. She was at the Debbie Allen Dance Academy, so that was in LA. And she went in there, and she was so open-minded about it. But they had these little black boys and girls who were dancing with Debbie Allen doing ballet, doing modern, doing jazz, doing African, doing it all. And so when I saw that, I was looking at the faces of the children, and they like lit up, right? To see Cardi B, someone who sings, WAP, someone who sings like Bodak Yellow, in the same classroom as them doing a dance class. Like they like, to them, it was just like, oh my God, I can't believe she's doing this. This makes me feel so cool, right? Like I'm doing something that Cardi B is doing. But then on the other side of that, right, it was affirmation. But on the other side of that, Cardi B, she grew up in the Bronx. She immediately said when she walked in, I grew up in the Bronx. I don't know nothing about dance class, right? And she came in, and this little Bronx girl, saw that she could do it. And Debbie Allen was cheering her on, letting her know that she could do it. And so she didn't think, like, probably before that, she didn't think this little, Dominican Trinidadian girl from the Bronx would ever have an opportunity to dance ballet, or to dance, African dance, or with Debbie Allen. Like, it was just both of those coins to me were really fascinating. And so, like you said, that affirmation on both ends, like students being affirmed and being able to, bring their skills to the forefront and understanding that the value and the power that they have. And then also thinking about like the adult side of that, right? Like, I think that often gets passed down. I used to see it as a music teacher where, parents would be like, oh, I wasn't good at music, so I don't think my child's gonna be good at music. And so that child develops that same thing. Or, we're too poor to be in, ballet classes. And then that child develops like, oh, I never did dance class because I couldn't afford to, right? Like, and that child develops that blockade thinking that it's, the whole elitism in the arts is a whole different conversation. But like, to think that Cardi B was like, I lived in the Bronx, I couldn't afford this, and now I am doing this, and I am able to do it. To me, that's so powerful. I was just overwhelmed watching that, because I just saw like the reactions from both the kids and from Cardi, that they both knew that this is something that affirms who they are as little Black kids, wherever they are, wherever they grew up.
Yeah.
So,
speaking of Cardi and her significant other Offset, they had that song Clout, talk about how folks do anything for clout. There's a lot of that still on the scene, even though it's fading away on the art scene, unfortunately. Folks making these statements and then it fades out, and a lot of it just seemed like they wanted to be, in the room or the right person at the table, but that advocacy isn't actually absolute. There are parameters, there are things that they feel like they can't do as institutions because they're thinking about donors, or they're thinking about that endowment or whatever. It's the same for individuals. I think this year we've seen a lot of Black folks, unfortunately, other folks of color, who, how can I say, the heat is a little too hot for them in the kitchen. They're worried about what job is going to fire them, or they're worried about what connections that they won't have if they really speak up and stand up for anti-Blackness. What are your words to those folks? I can understand that people are afraid to lose their jobs. I am someone who lost my job in 2020 for, standing up for anti-racism. What are your words to those folks afraid to stand up to their boss, afraid to make that social media post?
Yeah, I'm a little bit different because, I don't know. I just follow my gut with a lot of these things. One of the people I think about is like Michael Bobbitt, who currently is at the New Rep Theater, but I think will begin as the executive director of the Mass Cultural Council maybe next week, if I'm not mistaken. And so when Michael Bobbitt came into New Rep, I don't even think it's been a full year yet, but when he came into New Rep, he just came out the gate with anti-racism. Like, New Rep is going to focus on anti-racism. And he was making these bold public statements that basically was like, we stand for Black lives. And they came up with a whole anti-racism plan for the New Rep Theater. And there was a post that I saw on Facebook. I don't know if he shared it or someone else shared it. And it was, it was one of those like standing up for Black lives posts. And then somebody that was, I guess, a membership person or a donor had written in the comments, was like basically saying, It's not about Black Lives Matter, all lives, blah, 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 blah. And you know what the people at New Rep said? Okay, well, if you don't agree, you don't have to come to our venue. Right? Like, right? Like, that's fine. We don't need you. And I think we need to, institution-wise, we need to start doing that. But it's really difficult, like being an individual doing that. And so I'm someone who really, like, I'm really embedded with like spirituality, my ancestors, like, I feel like my grandmother and my mom, like all of my ancestors, like I feel like they drive me to do certain things. And so if I say something, I see something, I'm going to call it out regardless of how everybody else feel. But everybody can't do that because everybody's not afforded that privilege to, you know,
Right.
because of capitalism, everybody's not afforded to that. You know, somebody might say something and the next thing they know, they're losing their check and their livelihood.
Yeah.
But I think that's where accomplices come in, right? Like, who can we start tapping? We have all of these white people in the field. Who can we start tapping to be those supports to speak up when we cannot speak up? Because they'll attack us because we're the brown face or the brown body in the room. But if, you know, Jane Doe says something, they'll take that into consideration. So who can we strategically partner with to help speak up for us when we know that it could to potentially like risk our livelihoods? And I think that's where accompliceship comes in, right? Accompliceship, you have to risk all of that. You have to be ready for that risk to speak up when you see that other people are being put down or other people are being silenced.
And I just want to underscore the use of one of your words, the very intentional use of the word accomplice. You didn't say ally. You said accomplishment. Give us a little bit of clarity on that just before we wrap up here. Why is accomplice the word you use as opposed to ally?
Yeah, actually, so I went through art equity with Carmen Morgan, who is phenomenal, and that entire team is phenomenal. So if you haven't heard of art equity, please go look it up. But she was the one who brought that to my attention, because when you think about an accomplice, first off, white people get scared when you hear the word accomplice. They think they're going to jail. They think they're about to get shot, killed. They think that you robbing a bank together. Like all of that comes up. It's good. It should come up.
Right.
It should come up. That's exactly what should come up when you should be scared. But when you think of ally, like it's just the person kind of to your side. And there's a lot of resources that talk about, like, instead of using the word ally, to use accomplice, because accomplice is someone who's ride or die for you, right? Like it's someone who understands the value of your life and is willing to risk the value of their life for your life, right?
Yeah.
And so, even in 2020, I've seen a lot of posts talking about ally fatigue. What the fuck is that? Ally fatigue?
Oh, I haven't seen
like,
that.
What? I didn't even know.
I'm glad
what
I
is
haven't.
that? Right. What is that? Like, if you're tired, then imagine what Black and brown people are feeling.
Exactly.
So it's like, you can't say you are ally and you're fatigued, because that doesn't exist. Basically, you're passive.
Yeah.
And if you're an accomplice, you're active. You're not passive. You're not letting things slip by. If somebody says something problematic, you call that out. If somebody does something problematic, you call that out. Like you're not sending emails after the fact. I've been in a lot of situations where I have spoken up, and after it's happened, I got emails, texts, phone calls. I'm so sorry that happened to you. You were so right. Blah, blah, blah. That's ally. That's passive. We need somebody to be
accomplices, cussing them out right then and there.
Right. I say something, they be like, "Got your back, sis." Bow. And right.
I love it.
So we need more accomplices out there.
I wanted to end on a little Kwanzaa note, since that's the season we're in. This is coming out on the 5th day of Kwanzaa, the day marked by the guiding principle of Nia, or purpose. But there's so, when I read the op-ed that you put out and take a look at your work, I see the spirit of so many of those guiding principles. I'm going to read a little bit of the end of your op-ed here. You wrote, "As a field, we've waited far too long for these institutions to get on board with the movement towards racial equity. So now the call is for us, Black, Indigenous, and people of color artists, leaders, and the organizations that serve us. We must come together, build agency, support one another, shift the current systems that have alienated members of our community since their inception, and invest in ourselves themselves when these organizations will not. So when I read that, I'm thinking of the guiding principle of Kujichagulia, that self-determination. I'm thinking about Ujamaa, those collective economics. What's the Kwanzaa message that you want to send to all of the artists, all the arts administrators, and all of the potential accomplices, as you say, leaving 2020 and getting into 2021?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. First off, I want to shout out my cousins because I have two cousins, one named Imani, one named Nia. So Kwanzaa's been embedded in my family since the beginning.
This is not new.
Right, it's not new. And so, this is my Kwanzaa message. Thank you for bringing this up because often people have, for the past couple of weeks since that op-ed has come out, people have been like, well, thank you so much. And aren't you happy that, this is happening? And blah, 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 blah. The whole purpose of that op-ed was not for AFTA to start scrambling and doing what they get called out to do, right? Like that, I didn't care about that. That purpose of that op-ed was for BIPOC folks. And to say, look at this shit that's happening. Fuck them. And let's start coming together and supporting our own. So when people were like, oh my God, AFTA's doing an investigation. This one and that one is going on leave and blah, 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 blah. I didn't care about that. And people were sending me messages and I was like, that wasn't the purpose of what I said. The purpose of what I said was for us. So you missed that whole purpose, white person, right? That wasn't your business. It literally said for BIPOC folks to invest in one another. And we have to do that. In order for us to build collective movement, in order for us to shift the field, we have to invest in ourselves. Stop giving these white people our energy. You know how many articles I've been saying this, the first Black, the first Latinx, the first Indigenous. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, we're in 2020. Like, we're still talking about first? Or we're still talking about, if you win an award, awards are great, but whose standards are you winning the award by? Right? Like, why are we so hyped up to win someone else's award about their exclusive standards? That we can make our own opportunity for resources and for change and investment and for a whole new field, right? Like if we focus on our own, we can build up the arts administration world within ourselves without having to deal with what they do or going by their standards.
Since we ended with a little bit of Kwanzaa there, I thought I would bring in a work by composer Sean O'Loughlin called Imani. Scott, in the same way that Quanice is, an arts educator and administrator trying to put equity into the classroom, teaching these kids about this music. That's what I felt like my band director was trying to do for us. She was a white woman, but Memphis is mostly Black everything, including what the band was. So when it came to holiday time, she really made sure that she put this composition in front of us. And I almost get misty thinking about it because to this day, I still remember it. That was, 20 years ago. And I'm still remembering that this woman named Paula Turner made sure that the band for the holidays played a band tune that spoke to Kwanzaa. We need that everywhere. I think that's what Quanice is really trying to do, create that equity in every little corner. The other thing that I wanted to get your feedback on, Scott, Quanice, as you heard, did not speak to being an ally. She spoke to being an accomplice. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean to you from just for that being thrown at you just out of nowhere? What do you perceive as the difference between, for you, being an ally versus being an accomplice?
It's interesting you bring that up because to me, ally seems passive. Ally seems like something you can choose when you are going to be an ally. If you are an accomplice, you're sitting there in the jail cell with them, right?
That's funny. Sorry, that tickled me.
What, am I wrong? No, if you've got an accomplice, they're in it. Right. They're in it.
I guess you're right. But see, you're supposed to use your privilege as a white man to tell the white man with the keys, look, give me the keys. You can trust me. And then you break all of us out. You see?
Now that's an accomplice.
That's what we're talking about. So,
Right.
breaking Trilloquy, the podcast that is breaking the bars. Ooh, and there's even a music thing there. You see what I did?
Nice.
Anyway,
I see.
shout out to Quanice Floyd.
Thanks, Quanice.
Thank you so much. So to get us into the Trilloquy, once again, I wanted to make sure I'm giving some room to Kwanzaa. Again, today is the third day of Kwanzaa when we're recording this, guided by the principle of Ujima. And, we did our Kwanzaa breakdown last year. We won't do that this year. But one thing I did want to do, once again, is thank all of the people and all the radio stations, all the folks who played a role in the sounds of Kwanzaa, making it to the radio. I think I spoke to it last week. One of the tunes that I was so happy to include in the special was a work by Afro-Cuban composer named Mongo Santamaria, an arrangement by Valerie Coleman called Afro Blue. It really just speaks to the diaspora of being Black, how the guiding principles of Kwanzaa certainly apply to Afro-Americans, but can reverberate throughout the diaspora and even out to non-Black people as we talk about being an accomplice, as we talk about collective work and responsibility. I just love it. I love this holiday. I love this time of year. Shout out to everyone celebrating Kwanzaa this year. I hope you have a really wonderful Kwanzaa. Here's a little bit of Afro Blue by Mongo Santamaria and Valerie Coleman to get us into the final Trilloquy of 2020. So, Scott, I think it goes without saying that for me and for the world of public radio, the year 2020 was very interesting. I want to just one more time, and maybe as a means of leaving it behind, just affirm that my termination from Minnesota Public Radio was very rocky. There are still times in my life when I wake up in the morning and not wonder if I did something wrong or wonder if I would do something different, but just wonder if I have a place in the world. Minnesota Public Radio is not the first place that I have been fired from for doing what I thought was pro-Black, for fighting against racism and really being anti-racist. Is not the first time that has happened to me. And it makes me think, wow, am I just born in the wrong time? Is this wrong? Am I just out here by myself? But every week when I look at the Trilloquy numbers, when I read the positive emails, I know that there is something there. So through all of the stresses of being without a job for over 3 months now, can you imagine being unemployed for over 3 months during COVID? Because I can.
If I was 15.
Sure.
Not as an adult, no.
It's a very real thing, but I'm just so grateful to the listeners, and I'm so grateful to the institutions that have given me support and given me work. I just wanted to mention that as an affirmation to you listening. I know that we're all going through some rough things. I was fired from my job. Maybe you were fired or laid off from your job. Can't pay your rent. Argument with your family. Broke up with your significant other. Child is sick. Someone impacted by COVID. Fill in the blank. We all have things going on. It's been a really rough time, but through it all, I think that there is room to, as I've said before, in recent months, really tap into that gratitude and to really figure out how to take these challenges that have been put before us and turn them into something good, turning poison into medicine, as Buddhism teaches. Shout out to Caesar Chavetta. So I wanted to name that first and foremost as my true and real. There are times when I'm still mad at I was almost gonna say, Scott, there are times I'm still mad at y'all. I know how you feel about the word y'all. I'm not talking about you. When I say y'all,
it's a contraction of you all. So
there's still times when I'm mad at there aren't times when I'm mad. There are times that I'm frustrated with what I see as the infrastructure of classical radio and what we could be, how we really could be tastemakers, how we could be the people, the institutions that are making the orchestras turn the corner and that are making the conservatories
rather than the other way around.
That part of it frustrates me. I'm not mad at the individuals because I understand some people have to hold up certain institutions because they can't stand out here on their own 2 feet. Okay, no shade. I get that. I also get that we have to change the world. I really hope there are more people that are going to step up as Quanice does, and so many other people, and really help us do it, you know. So whatever you're going through in your life right now, make that challenge something that you can learn from, something that you can use as the impetus for change that is even greater than yourself.
My greatest challenge this year has been working at American Public Media while you do not. And being on this podcast, you said once that it was like we were on different teams. And that has rattled around in my head a lot. And I have done a lot of thinking about what it means for a 50-year-old white man to be having these conversations. I don't know if I'm always that well equipped, right? But I don't know what else to do. I don't know what other contribution I can make other than to continue to try to do the best job I can on this podcast while at the same time being the best host that I can be at work for however long I end up doing that. So it's interesting that you should talk about wondering where your place is or where you're supposed to be, because yeah, I'm wondering that too. And if you move away, I'm going to be a shut-in. I don't know if that's the answer that you were after. I don't know if I'm getting anywhere close to any of it, but that was my biggest challenge this year.
What are you doing with it? What are you planning to do to traverse those challenges and deal with the things that you can deal with?
I don't know how to do it. That's part of the problem. This is the first time that I'm facing some of the things, like an onslaught of emails or DMs or whatever based on something that I said. And man, that tells me that I still got a ways to go to learn, that I still need to be doing my work to make sure that I'm not making those mistakes. So that even further makes me think, okay, then you should be doing the podcast, because there's probably other white folks out here listening to you who have even less of an idea of how to handle these situations than you do.
I think that's a perfect segue into what I wanted to leave everyone with. When we talk about New Year, there's a lot of energy and idea discourse around refresh, or what words, restart and all that sort
reset.
of thing. Reset, yeah. When you're talking about really going into the new year, still thinking about how you can be engaged and what all of these challenges mean, I think that's really how more of us need to think about this new year in particular. We all set up about this time last year till midnight and said Happy New Year, and look what happened, right? So when we go into 2021, what I would like to go in with, Scott, what I hear you're going in with, and what I think we all need to go in with, is the spirit of the work not going away. Coronavirus, the panorama, is not going away. That's still very much here. When we talk about issues of racial equity on a large scale and in the arts, all of that is not going away, and neither are those of us who are painstakingly doing the work to change it all. The challenges that you go through, the emails that you have to go through, sift through, Scott, the hate mail that I sift through, the love mail that I sift through, it's all part of what is the bigger picture. As I've been saying to all these college classes, the presentation I give called The Bigger Picture, it's about creating a world that really works for all of us, where we can just find some sort of happiness and some sort of meaning that doesn't require the existence of racist and problematic structures. So to continuing the work in 2021. The New Year's party is at your house this year, right?
That's right.
All right. Well, if you have the champagne, I'll bring the weed and we'll have a great time.
See you there.